Hello, I'm Ted Seides, and this is Investment Management Operations. This show explores the inner workings of the most sophisticated institutions in the industry. Through conversations with executives across operations, compliance, legal, and finance, you'll hear how key operating partners run their businesses in an ever-changing and complex investment landscape. You can join our mailing list and access Capital Allocators content at capitalallocators.com.
I'm Scott McDonald, and I'm your host. My guest on today's show is Troy Pospisil. Troy is the CEO of Ontra, a legal tech firm that was created for the private markets industry. It was great sitting down with Troy to talk about the evolution of how legal and compliance workflows are going digital. We cover his career from management consulting to the investment team at H.I.G Capital, where he saw a glaring need for better solutions with doing deals and raising funds. We discuss product development opportunities and challenges, multi-stakeholder engagements, and how digital native leaders are embracing software to speed up fund closings at a lower cost and compliance risk. And with that, please enjoy my conversation with Troy Pospisil. Well, Troy, thanks for joining me today. I'd love to kick this off before we get into legal tech. I'd love to hear about your background and how you got there.
Scott, it's great to be here. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be doing this. So I grew up in California, and I've always been very entrepreneurial. I started a number of, to call them businesses would be generous, but interesting schemes in high school that were entrepreneurial. I went to college at NYU, and I worked a lot in college. I did a number of sales jobs, including door-to-door sales for a dog food brand, where I walked around and visited about 120 different pet food stores and walked in and was trying to get them to stock this organic dog treat brand that was based in California. And that was really excellent experience. And I also did some internships that were a little bit more professional in nature, including at a big management consulting firm. And after college, I went into management consulting, did a lot of really interesting projects for big global Fortune 500 type companies, and also was lucky enough to get staffed on a number of M&A due diligence projects for private equity firms, which got me really interested and excited about that industry. Was very fortunate to ultimately land H.I.G Capital, which I spent 3 years at and was a really excellent experience. I have a ton of respect for the way that they've grown that firm, the way they invest, and I learned just an insane amount in the 3 years that I was there. And while I was there, I was based in the San Francisco office. I had a lot of good friends who were working in technology, horizontal software companies like Salesforce, and also some good friends that were at emerging vertical software companies like Viva and Appfolio, and was able to see the power of building specialized vertical tools for specific industries that had really unique workflows. I had a front row seat to how private equity firms were operating. It was also a really interesting time in the industry. The firms were really rapidly professionalizing, going from really founder-driven firms to more professionalized global organizations. Big US firms were really starting to enter Europe, enter Asia, build out robust management teams with leaders in all the key functions that you would see at any large corporate. And their businesses were becoming increasingly complicated. You had the entire industry registering with the SEC for the first time. You had firms who were historically single product investors. Maybe they focused on credit or they focused on leverage buyouts, who were now expanding and becoming multi-product firms. H.I.G was a big part of that trend as they expanded from private equity into various forms of credit and various types of private equity, and they were going into Europe as well. And that was adding a lot of complexity. And LPs were becoming much more sophisticated and demanding in how they partnered with private equity firms. The whole industry really kicked off when David Swensen at Yale started allocating a substantial portion of their assets to alternatives. He, of course, got great returns that were the envy of the LP world. And then people started to allocate more and more of their assets to alternatives. And When I was working at H.I.G, you now had the big LPs, people like CalPERS and Texas Teachers and Sovereigns and all the universities who had been LPs in private funds now for a decade or two and had really come up to speed on how do we do this well. And so they were starting to allocate large portions of their capital to private funds asset managers, and they were really experienced and they had experienced teams. And so they were demanding more in terms of bespoke arrangements, things like funds of one. They were starting to demand more in their side letters, more nuanced and more numerous restrictions in terms of how they wanted their capital to be allocated. And so all of those trends, the increase in regulation, the growth of the firms, and the growth in a way that was adding complexity by going into more asset classes and regions, and then the increasing demands and sophistication of LPs, we're creating a situation where the complexity of managing a firm was growing faster than even the assets under management. And you saw firms attempting to stay on top of this by just hiring. And so you were seeing the number of people in the back office, especially, start to balloon pretty quickly. And also just a lot of additional spend with third-party consultants and service providers. And from where I sat, it seemed like that trend wasn't going to stop. You were going to continue to see the complexity of managing the firm and the costs associated with managing the firm grow faster than AUM as far as the eye could see. And the only thing that potentially was going to mitigate that was digitizing operations and adopting digital tools that could increase efficiency, lower costs by helping to organize and automate, and of course, lower risk, all of the key processes that are the heartbeat of managing a private fund. So that's a long-winded way of saying I was really inspired by all of the trends that were happening around me and my background in having a taste of entrepreneurship from some experiences in high school and college to step out of my investing seat and attempt to build a technology company that helped this industry scale in a more efficient way by building focused vertical technology tools for the industry so that it could scale more efficiently and in a lower risk way.
So when you were in that seat as an investor, were you highly involved with interfacing with portfolio companies as well as LPs? It feels like this has an operational bent to it that not all investment people have access to or exposure to.
I think it was the times and also just the seat that I landed in. I was lucky to be at a firm like H.I.G. The way that we invested, at least back then, is the deal teams were responsible for everything. And so we were sourcing transactions, we were negotiating the deals with the sellers and the investment banks that were involved. We were involved with the portfolio company post-closing, so sitting on the boards of those companies, partnering with those management teams to try to create value. And then we were involved in all aspects of the transaction as well. So managing all the traditional aspects of the transaction, like the key elements of diligence, of course, like financial due diligence in partnership with your QOV partner, legal diligence in partnership with the law firms, and negotiating the purchase agreements and the operating agreements. We were also involved in running the debt raising process. So that was something that the deal team was responsible for. So any aspect of negotiating and managing a private equity deal we were involved with. And that was an amazing experience because you just learned so much so quickly. The way the industry has evolved is you're seeing more and more specialization. So you're seeing more firms centralize managing debt providers and running those debt raising processes centrally, which I have no doubt is creating value for firms because they can do that more efficiently and effectively. But at least when I was in private equity and at the firm I was at, I was fortunate enough to see every aspect of the business, soup to nuts, including getting to be involved with and build relationships with people in the finance function, the legal function, the compliance function, the IR function. And so really got to see every aspect of the business, which was very helpful.
And what was the aha moment when you said, this is something I want to actually build?
There were a couple of different workflows that I found particularly annoying. There's probably no better word for it. So one was high volume routine contracting. All of us were incredibly busy. We had a lot of very important work to do, strategic work. work that actually aligned with what we were trying to do as a firm, which is source more deals, invest, partner with our portfolio companies to create value. But 15-20% of our day was taken up by just negotiating and keeping track of high volume routine contracts. So these are things like non-disclosure agreements that you're reviewing and negotiating as part of reviewing a new transaction, joinders that you're sending out to lenders and other service providers that you're bringing on board to review a transaction, non-reliance letters that you're reviewing as part of service providers that are providing diligence engaged in a transaction, and then a wide variety of engagement letters and vendor contracts. As a firm, we were processing probably 5,000 to 10,000
Wow.
of those types of agreements on an annual basis. And each investment team was processing a meaningful fraction of that. So that took up a lot of time. It was important that it was done consistently in alignment with what the leaders at our firm, our general counsel and CFOs wanted done in those documents. So there were specific preferences. They wanted terms that they were willing and not willing to agree to. And so it had to get done right. It needed the right level of attention, but doing it better, faster for the deal professional was not their highest priority. And so you ended up with a lot of wasted time. It was probably done across many firms in the industry inconsistently without the level of focus necessary because you had a lot of more junior resources focused on it. And so that was a particular workflow where I was like, gosh, if you could provide a solution to investment firms to automate this in a cost-effective way where you could take this off the plate of your ambitious, really valuable investment professionals, that would create a lot of value for the firm because now you're getting back all that time that you can now spend sourcing more deals, closing more investments, helping your portfolio companies create more value. So that was one. I would say the other was tracking information in long, complex corporate contracts. And so as a deal professional, you have to track and manage all of the terms and restrictions inside of your credit agreements with your lenders on all of your deals, your operating agreements. You have to be aware of what are the investment restrictions in our LPA and side letters for the pool of capital that I'm investing out of. And all of those things implicated how you were able to act on really a day-to-day basis. We were looking at deals across industries, and there were definitely times we had to pass because of restrictions in a side letter or an LPA. And to get an answer to the question of, can we invest in a tanning salon or a company that sells lottery tickets in their stores? That was a very difficult question to answer. You would think that would be relatively easy, but when you close a fund, you end up with hundreds of side letters. Each of those side letters today, the way the industry has evolved due to the increasing sophistication of the LPs, has on average about 50 different obligations and restrictions. And oftentimes you're investing out of multiple pools of capital. So you may have a primary fund, but there may be some secondary pool of capital that you're allocating capital for that deal to. You have to answer that question perfectly right. Because if you get it wrong, you could damage your reputation with your LPs, and regulators don't like that. And so to get at that information was really painful. It was entombed inside agreements. You just had to find the information. You had to navigate your way around the firm, find whose shared drive it was on, where it was. Fast forward to today, we now provide products that help automate and organize those exact two problems that I was dealing with as an investment professional.
Timing was always a critical point with creating technology. What was your feeling of where you were when you decided to launch?
Someone once told me there's never a perfect time to start a business and there's never a perfect time to get married and have kids. You just got to do it. So there were definitely interesting positive trends happening at the time, and there were definitely some headwinds. One of the positives was at the time, cloud software was becoming increasingly easy to build. Even 5 years before I had started the company, you needed a lot more capital to start a software company because you didn't have all of the great tooling and services that companies like Amazon, AWS, and there's a massive ecosystem of cloud services that make it easier to build software. So you could do it with a smaller team than you needed previously. And especially for a vertical software company, that is really important because it's harder to go raise tens of millions of dollars out of the gate to get started. And we bootstrapped for 5 years. And so I was footing the bill out of my savings for a meaningful period of time. I would say one of the headwinds was this was an industry that was averse to change. You had people who were doing things the same way for a long period of time. And what we've seen is it was on the brink of not working. And at the time, people were averse to change, and you didn't have a lot of people eager to be different and try the new and different and innovative thing, at least in this industry. So that was definitely an uphill battle, but we were confident that we were providing solutions that were high ROI for these customers, that were going to make their lives easier, save them costs, lower risk. And so we were persistent, to say the least, and we were able to get in business. There's been some really important developments in technology, in the evolution of how firms are thinking about adopting technology. I would say one of the big important trends for us has been AI. We were early. We hired our first machine learning engineer in 2016. So that was years before LLMs. And we were starting to incorporate AI workflows into our software tools as early as 2017. And then when LLMs came onto the scene, that really unlocked a lot of exciting features that we could incorporate into our workflows. Our products have, I think, really exploded in terms of how valuable and feature rich they are for our customers as we've been able to incorporate features that are driven by and underpinned by LLMs in particular. And then I'd say there's been an increasing openness to adopting technology to solve these problems. And I think some of that is frankly just who is in the leadership seat at a lot of these firms. You had a lot of these big investment firms that were founded in the 90s was sort of when a lot of the big brand name firms were coming into existence that are massive today. And you had leaders that didn't grow up as digital natives. Fast forward to today, at a lot of these firms, there is a changing of the guard, not just at the CEO and leadership level, but also the people who lead all of the key functions across the organization. And those folks grew up basically when I grew up. They grew up as digital natives. I got a cell phone when I was in junior high. It looked a lot different than the cell phones we have today. I was playing Snake and swapping out the Nokia faceplate, a little bit different than the iPhones we have now. But we now have a group of leaders who are very interested in leveraging technology to improve their operations. And they're also now deep into a trend of compounding complexity. All of the trends, regulation, growth, increasing complexity, those have just been accelerating. You talk about complexity, just look at the types of funds that are being structured within firms. You went from relatively traditional private equity funds that, by the way, had maybe one or two side letters to now every fund has 300 side letters. Those have gone from an average of 2 or 3 terms to 50 plus. People are also raising SPACs. They have funds of one. They have continuation vehicles. And so people are just getting more and more innovative. People obviously are diversifying the product types that they are in, moving into credit and infrastructure and real estate. And all of that creates a tremendous amount of operational complexity. And so these new leaders are stepping into a situation that's almost unbearable from a complexity perspective. And they know that they need to do something different. So there's not this, oh, the way we're doing it works. It's like, oh my God, if we don't change something, stuff's going to break.
Just thinking about the time for closing. So you're closing on a private equity fund. You've got 300 side letters. You have the compendium, which you have to go through the election process to say which ones do you want. And then the time to actually close, I think, has just grown over time. That's my gut reaction.
I would even back up further. Our customers don't use a compendium because what our Insight product does is we leverage AI to take the LPA and the side letters. We're able to extract all of the necessary information that you need. So it takes every clause, it labels it, it categorizes it into what type of clause this is, it summarizes it, and then it takes that structured data set in a much more effective way, allows you to make that data actionable. So we take that data for your affirmative obligations, things that you have to do on particular dates or that are triggered by particular events. There's a whole task management workflow that ties back to the underlying language in the document so you can very proactively keep track of and manage and audit whether your firm is meeting your obligations. It makes it much easier to investigate restrictions. So using AI conversational search, you can just ask, can I invest in a company that sells lottery tickets? It'll give you an answer. It'll show you the clauses within your side letters or LPA that it's using to answer that question. You can filter by different categories. What are my key man provisions? You can literally pull those up across all of your funds in a matter of minutes or really even seconds. And then the closing process, as you were alluding to, managing the MFN election process in particular is very painful if done in a manual way that it's always been done. You have to manually go through all of the side letters, identify which provisions are electable to people who have an MFN, who they are electable by, generally based on the commitment amount, and then you have to create a customized election form for each LP. That takes 1 to 2 years to get through that process when done manually for a large, complicated fund. And people are genuinely spending upwards of $500,000 in external fees to get that completed. So with our system, because you've turned all of the documents into structured data, we can automatically identify all of the information you need to create your election forms. Within a matter of literally a couple of hours, you can go through and just quickly audit those forms and see which of these clauses are electable or non-electable. It automatically generates those MFN election forms. It distributes those digitally to your LPs in a really nice digital user experience. They can make those elections online. The moment they submit them back to you, you are instantaneously now complying with those elections because they're in your system of record and your database. So we're taking something that took thousands and thousands of hours, whether done internally or externally, so a tremendous amount of cost, very error prone, that took 1 to 2 years, that created a really negative experience for your LPs, to something that really takes a few hours and creates a really nice customer experience for your customers. And of course, lowers the risk and the chance of error for you and makes it such that you can start complying with your MFN elections in a matter of weeks from the time that you close the fund. That's just one example of where technology has the opportunity to unlock a tremendous amount of value in the form of time, cost, and risk.
So you've been doing this for 10 years. How many people do you have today? Just an overview would be helpful.
We're about 350 people. We have a decent concentration in New York, in London, in the Bay Area. We're about 50-50 in office and remote. We built the company at an interesting time. Pre-COVID, we were less than 50 people. A lot of that growth and hiring was done during the COVID period. The economy was very hot. It was hard to hire. And so we were open to people living in all sorts of places. And so we ended up hiring people, I think, in about 18 different states. And then we had a lot of our existing people who moved. There was a lot of migration during that time. So we saw a lot of that movement. And so ultimately, as COVID wound down and we were getting back to office, we had a lot of people in a lot of places and a lot of really talented people. And so we now have a hybrid culture where we spend time, we're very intentional about getting people together in person, which is an investment, but we think an important investment. And so we allocate budget for that so that people can collaborate and build relationships. And then we've had to build, I think, thoughtful processes that allow people to collaborate and connect effectively in a virtual environment. And of course, there's been an explosion of tools that make that easier, like Zoom and Slack. So we're a global business.
One question I have is when you have a technology platform that really requires somebody to know how funds operate from a legal perspective, from an operating perspective, how do you find people who have a legal training with a technology mindset?
That is a great question. It's definitely taken us a while to get it perfect. I think today we've gotten it right. We have really strong teams that are, for all of our products, that are teams that are integrated with really every area that you need to build a full product. So you have engineers, you have product people, you have data people. Even within engineers, you're going to have your AI engineers, you're going to have QA folks, all embedded within that team. And then also within our product team, we have legal specialists who understand the industry and our customers incredibly well. These are typically people who came from the industry who are sitting there partnering on a day-to-day basis, hand in hand, in developing our features. And so especially in AI, when you're building prompts, you can't do that unless you have very detailed knowledge of the problems, the document types, the clauses, how people are going to use that data. And so we've built integrated teams. In every single team for every product, we have dedicated people that have every area of expertise that you need to build products for this industry. The other thing I think we've done a really good job at is education, because what we found over time is we want and need every person in our organization to be very curious and very knowledgeable about our end market. It's great to have one expert in the room who's partnering with the other folks who have functional expertise, but the ideal outcome is that everyone has empathy for your customers, really understands your customers, because what we do is, I think, somewhat uniquely complicated, because all of the products that we build, the users don't just sit within the four walls of the purchasing customer. These are workflows that span an ecosystem. You have various stakeholders across a very complicated, interconnected ecosystem. And so we need everyone, the engineers, our marketing people, to really understand all of this. And so when people join our company, we do a lot of training. So we have the people at the organization, like me and others who've come from the industry, who've sat down and spent a lot of time developing training on the industry, on the specific roles within our customers, what they're focused on, what they care about, and very detailed information that includes recorded customer interviews, detailed process mapping that we try to educate everyone who's joining the company on. There's obviously a cost to doing that. They're spending several months after they join the company on training and getting up to speed on what we do, but then they are far more productive once they are working on solving these problems for customers. So that's something we sort of had to learn over time, and it's a big investment that we had to make, but I think it's one of the most important things we do as a company.
Was it a big move trying to actually open up a London office, go after a different legal jurisdiction?
Everything is hard. Everything is complicated. I sort of view it as just another thing we had to get done to create the value we wanted to create for our customers, especially for our contract automation solution, where we're processing high volume routine contracts for the biggest asset managers in the world. That's not a US problem. That's a global problem. They're dealing with those contract types in multiple languages, in multiple jurisdictions, in all time zones. That's where their investors are. If we're going to serve them, that's where we need to be. And so it was a lot of work, but luckily we're not afraid of hard work, and we like interesting, complex problems. And so we were happy to get that done so that we could serve as a one-stop global solution for large global asset managers.
What was the reaction of the legal community? So in-house counsel, there's a lot of benefit, but then there's a natural tension between the legal system, which is a function of profitability, which is a function of time and effort.
We, I think, didn't know how that was going to play out when we started. We didn't know how we were going to be received, because big corporate law firms who serve this industry are very important influencers and partners to our customers, maybe one of the most important. We have been, I think, pleasantly surprised that we have become very collaborative with and partners with all of the big corporate law firms who serve this end market. Those firms are experiencing the same pressures that the private equity firms are facing. And so the demands on these big firms in terms of how many transactions they're needing to do, how complex those transactions have become, has increased dramatically, and they're having trouble keeping up. They're having trouble recruiting and retaining enough people to serve their customers effectively. And so they are also looking for solutions to take the more mundane, routine aspects of their work and find ways to automate and streamline those so that they can focus their time and their energy on the work that really matters, on being thoughtful counsel to the big strategic aspects of the transaction for their customers.
Has that been an evolution?
I think it's been the same evolution you've seen with the customers. This industry has become increasingly complex. The amount of work, just the sheer volume of it, has grown. And that's been up and to the right. And as that's happened, the need to find efficiencies has increased. And then similarly, you have younger partners taking leadership roles at these firms who are now leading the practice groups, managing the client relationships for their biggest clients, who grew up as digital natives, who are open to and interested in solving this mountain of complexity and the sheer volume of work with new ways of doing things. We have a team that's focused on building relationships and partnerships with the big brand name corporate law firms. And we've got really strong collaborative relationships where those folks are in our software every day, using it, being important influencers and buying decisions to our customers as they're thinking about what digital tools to adopt. Our customer is generally the private equity fund, but these are multi-constituent workflows that are highly interconnected. And so when our product teams are mapping out how are we going to build this feature, we can't just get the perspective and understand the use case of the people that sit inside the four walls of the fund. We have to go get the perspective of the law firm that's advising them, their fund accountants who are supporting them, really all the investment banks, all the constituents in this ecosystem, if we want to actually nail the workflow and build tools that really solve the problem, because all of those folks are involved in those workflows and in that problem.
So what's going on today and down the road with automation, legal tech opportunities? Love to hear more.
You and I have spent time talking about the Corporate Transparency Act. We have a product called Atlas, which is a purpose-built AI-enabled entity management system focused on entity management for the private funds industry. One of the big workflows that people are going to have to figure out how to contend with is filing to comply with the Corporate Transparency Act, so doing your beneficial ownership reporting. And so one of the features that we launched a few months ago is we have a direct API integration with FinCEN, the corporate agency that you have to do your filing with. And if you're an Atlas customer and you already are managing your entities within our system, it's very easy to tag which entity is exempt or non-exempt. And literally at the click of a button, you can do all of your beneficial ownership reporting filings. That feature is very emblematic of what we're trying to do for the industry. The Corporate Transparency Act, if done in a historically manual way, has the potential to take, for a fund that's literally sitting on top of tens of thousands of entities, that could take tens of thousands of hours and drive a lot of costs and obviously be extremely error prone, which could lead to fines and more rework that you've got to go do. So by adopting a digital tool that serves as a single system of record that uses AI to consistently and accurately organize and structure all the data associated with your entities, you can do that work literally at the click of a button. That's one thing. In our Insight product, our digital MFN election workflow, we are seeing sort of the early wave of adoption of that feature. So we now have it in use by the biggest, most complicated funds from the biggest asset managers in the world. It's in the hands of all of the largest brand name corporate law firms who are using that. That's something I'm really excited about. That's a workflow that historically would take 1 to 2 years, cost hundreds of thousands of dollars or more. And we've now more or less automated it with digital software. And it was hard to do. And then in our contract automation product, which is the product for processing high volume routine contracts like NDAs, we've been able to get a tremendous amount of efficiency using AI and LLMs. And so historically, when you were reviewing and marking up a document, that was all very manual. Now we can digitize our customers' editing preferences. So in our system, in a digital format, what are you willing or not willing to agree to on every single term? And then leveraging all of your historical precedent and Gen AI, we can help people accurately and consistently review and mark up a document with just mouse clicks. So that's something that we launched earlier this year, and we're also going to make that available as a standalone software product for our customers. Historically, we've delivered our contract automation product as an end-to-end solution, but there are some customers out there that want to keep some of this work in-house for particular business units, regions, or document types. And so we're now going to deliver them a pure software product that leverages all of the great tooling that we've built in our end-to-end solution, but they can now leverage to be far more efficient, consistent, and in alignment with their editing preferences across their firm.
Is the intention there to actually reduce the negotiation process because the proposed changes are more in sync with the original author's drafting approach?
Yeah, the consistency will definitely cut down on back and forth because now as a firm, you're approaching every single term in a consistent way. And if a counterparty is sending you the same form or even the same clause across your whole organization, you're now marking it up in the exact same way. That's going to reduce confusion and complexity dramatically. And so what we're seeing is customers who use our contract automation product, the turnaround time in terms of number of days from document receipt to document signature is getting cut literally in half. I'll mention one other thing because it's been really fun to see how people are using it is a few months ago, we rolled out our read-write API that helps us connect our products to create cross-product workflows so that customers who are using more than one of our products actually get more benefit because there's efficiency and shared data and workflows across those products. So all the big global asset managers, they have big internal IT teams and they have their own data lakes, their own tools, and they want an integrated tech stack. And so we've now seen all of the big global asset managers adopt our API and are doing some really interesting things, both with the read aspect of it in terms of taking data out of our system and putting that into central data lakes, into firm-wide task management tools, customer relationship management tools, CRMs. But we're also seeing firms do some really interesting things with the write aspect of the API. We have one global customer that is one of the largest investment banks in the world that had built an internal permission management application where they want to manage permissioning internally for all of their users. And we've been able to connect our permissioning framework into that permissioning framework. So that's been fun to see.
So when you're rolling out these new enhancements, and so there's a ton of work that's done there. So how do you make sure that the end client knows the value of the work involved beyond just release?
First and foremost, we build everything in partnership with our customers. So for every product we build, for every feature we build, we always sign up what we refer to as co-development partners. And so for anything we're building, we're trying to build that with at least 6 or more existing customers who are very passionate about that particular product or feature. And we partner with them the whole way through the build process. So showing them mock-ups, getting their feedback on it, giving them early access, getting them in as beta users. That obviously helps ensure that we're building what the customers want. And so when we roll it out, we don't fall on our face. That's step one, is you got to build the right feature. And then, of course, you have to enable all of your customers to use that feature. So first and foremost, you need the data. So you need to architect your product in a way that you can measure usage and adoption of those features. And there's a lot of great tools now that you can weave in to your software where you can measure exactly how customers are using your products, what buttons they're clicking on or not clicking on, how many seconds they spend on each page, where their mouse is hovering throughout the process. So that data is very important because the anecdotal evidence of interviewing customers is helpful, but ultimately the data across tens of thousands of users speaks the loudest. You have to have a thoughtful communication process. So we have a great, what we call our customer success team. So those are the people that are interacting with our existing users on a day-to-day basis to support them in using our products. So we enable them to communicate all new features to our customers, and they're obviously tracking adoption of the different features and dashboards so they can see If the customers that haven't adopted it, then they're going to follow up and communicate a second, a third, a fourth time because they know these are great features and they want to make sure that customers at least have a chance to try them out. And then you do a series of communications, webinars, customer newsletters, and then you do little things in the product like little pop-ups. Have you seen this? Check this out. And of course, you try to do that in a tailored way. So if someone's using the feature, you pull that back. And if someone's not using the feature, you try to remind them until hopefully they're adopting and using and getting value out of that feature.
I think there's a helpful connectivity between really education and product launches, because a lot of people will just develop stuff and say, here you go. And people are like, no, thanks. The other question I have is, what industry resource, book, could be an article, Twitter account that you might refer to people?
I really enjoyed your podcast and the family of podcasts from your organization. I think that's a great service to the industry. It helps with knowledge sharing, which is something we try to do through customer events and just connecting people when we see a need. So I'm really excited to be finally on a podcast I've been listening to since you launched and since your family of podcasts launched. So actually, you talked about how do we get people up to speed on the industry. We ask all of our people to go through your back catalog because so many of our customers actually have been on your podcast talking about the types of problems we solve. We're going to launch a number of new products in the coming year. And so we are obviously doing our own diligence, but actually listening to your podcast has been really valuable for everyone at our organization.
I appreciate that. That's flattering. Maybe I'll close with, what advice would you give to an emerging manager from a technical perspective?
Think about architecting scalable operations from day one. It's much harder to go through a change management process when you have already designed your organization around an inefficient, non-scalable process. And so obviously you have to spend a lot of time thinking about how are you going to source investments? How is your investment committee going to work so you make great investment decisions? How are you going to support your portfolio companies and the investments you make to create value? But you're also building a business. An asset manager is a business, and a business is a product. And so make sure that you're being really thoughtful about how you are designing that business, because the best asset managers in the world, the ones that have been able to scale, the Blackstones, the KKRs, the Apollos, the BlackRocks, that's why they've been able to scale. They're very thoughtful about their business, the talent they're bringing on, the processes that they've implemented, the systems that they use to scale. Because if you don't do that, you're going to run into roadblocks and it's going to be hard to scale.
Good stuff. Troy, I learned a few things. Thanks for your insight. And I look forward to staying in touch.
Scott, thank you. This was a lot of fun.
Thanks for listening to the show. If you like what you heard, hop on our website at capitalallocators.com, where you can access past shows, join our mailing list, and sign up for premium content. Have a good one, and see you next time.